Great, so welcome back. So this week we're going to focus on positive emotion. So for the last 2 weeks we've essentially been focusing on mindfulness. So part of integration is mindfulness, but it's not enough just to be mindful. We also need to act in order to flourish. So we need to actively cultivate a positive state of mind. So this is the section in which we take action. Hi, come on in. Yeah. So in order to cultivate a positive state of mind, we need to be able to distinguish between positive states of mind and have a deeper understanding of the meaning and consequences of our actions. And seeing that if we want to live well, we need to cultivate a sense of gratitude and to be generous. They're the things that help us live well. So in the story of the Buddha, this is the stage where he gets up at the dead of night and he leaves everything behind. So the first part of the sort of Buddha myth is he is born into this wealthy family, he has everything he can possibly want, all the luxuries, he lives a very comfortable life, but he sees that, he still feels dissatisfied. So in the archetypal realm, this is the departure. So Siddhartha as he was then, had seen old age, sickness and death, but he had also seen the holy man. However, he could have seen all this and stayed home. So this is the part of the story where the metaphor for ourselves is we can see these things and then we have an insight, and we can choose whether to act on the insight or not. So in the Buddha story, actually, he sees the four sides, like he sees old age, sickness and death, and he really sees them. But further on in the story, when he actually makes a departure, you get these radiant lights, radiant beings of light, and they're usually a signifier that something important is happening. And what this means for us is that we can have insights, but until we act on them, they're just insight. Nothing changes. Like they won't really affect our lives. And I was trying to think of an example of this in my own life, and a little bit of the problem with not acting on an insight is you kind of forget them. But I think this is relevant. I'm not entirely sure, but quite a number of years before I started coming to the Buddhist Center regularly, I did actually go on a retreat, and it was quite significant actually. I was on this retreat for a week, and it was the first time I'd ever been on retreat, and I do remember at the time sort of feeling. I don't know how many of you have been on retreat, but you get the sense I had the sense of where I was seeing things, I felt like I was seeing beauty in a way I'd never seen it before. I remember really noticing birds, being really fascinated by birds. Tasting my food, everything just came more alive on that retreat. And then I came back home, and I think I vaguely looked up to see if there was any group close to me, and there wasn't. And then that just faded into the background, and my life continued as normal. So it's sort of not enough just to have a really strong experience. In a way, you have to take that experience forward for it to become meaningful. So the significant part in the story of Siddhartha is that he leaves the palace. So he makes quite a drastic move. I mean, in a way, he gives up everything and starts this new way of life. And it's quite dramatic. So for us, it's probably going to be less dramatic. In fact, it's probably a good thing if it were less dramatic. Because I'm imagining that for Siddhartha, as he was then, he was probably really integrated in a way that that we're probably not. So in this course, we refer to it as a journey. So we have the first stage of integration, and then we move on to the second stage of positive emotion. But actually, we don't ever really leave that first stage behind. We take that along with us. So we keep on with the integration stage, and we start moving into exploring positive emotion. Yeah, so, and it's important that we do keep on trying to do the practices that facilitate integration, because unless we're integrated, we can't act wholeheartedly. Yeah, so and if we're going to make any lasting changes, we need to sort of be behind them. So I'm going to say a bit about positive emotion, and I might start by saying a bit about what it's not. So in a sense, positive, the word positive, doesn't, in this context, doesn't necessarily mean cheerful and upbeat. And the word emotion doesn't necessarily mean very strong feelings. So if somebody brings me a cup of tea and I have a sense of gratitude, that is a positive emotion, but it's not necessarily a very strong, it's not very, necessarily a very strong emotion. So, in the book, Maitreyabandhu says he prefers referring to this sort of section as kusala karma. And what kusala means is skillful or helpful in the sense of morally good, intelligent, altruistic, and karma means action. Just to say, he says that he prefers using kusala karma because then we don't get caught up in the... so we've already got meanings attached to the words positive and emotion, and if we bring in kusala karma, we can come to them fresh. We can come to the actual meaning of the phrase in a fresh way. Yeah, so kusala means... what does it mean? Morally good, intelligent, altruistic, all those things. And karma means action. I know when I first came across the word karma, I sort of had a slight misunderstanding of the word. It was as though I think I had an understanding that there was this universe out there that kept a tally of all good and bad things. So if you did good things, you had correspondingly good karma, and if you did bad things, you had bad karma. But it doesn't actually mean that. It just means action. There is a Buddhist word called karma vipaka, and that's kind of the results of your actions. And I guess that's kind of what people are referring to when they talk about karma in that way. But so when we're referring to kusala karma or positive emotion, it's in terms of skillful or helpful, intelligent action. So I remember when I first came along to the Buddhist Center, I heard terms like skillful and unskillful, and I think I really liked that. It did feel a bit like the words were interchangeable with good and bad. So we were just using the word skillful instead of good. But I think for me the term skillful can imply kind of practice. So although it is similar that sort of open-hearted, generous, honest actions are good. If I apply the term skillful to them, it feels like they can be cultivated. They don't just end with, good feels a bit like a full stop, whereas skillful feels much more like the action can be cultivated. And I think it's the same for unskillful actions. So if, the term sort of greedy, harsh, mean, we can associate those terms with being bad. But then if I act in those ways, and it can feel a bit like, okay, well then I'm a bad person. So where does that leave me? Whereas if I act in those ways, I can on one level see that they're unskillful, so I can do something about that. It doesn't feel like, oh, that sums me up as a person. That just means that there are these tendencies and I can do something about them. They're not a dead end. So, and in a way we all have the capacity to act unskillfully, and we all have the capacity to transform these actions. So in order to transform our actions, we need to be able to tell the difference between what's skillful and what's unskillful. And broadly speaking, generally skillful actions do feel good and unskillful actions feel bad. But that's not always the case. I guess that's why we have to imply intelligence to it. So I was thinking, like a skillful action could feel uncomfortable. And I was speaking to a friend of mine, and I was saying, obviously thinking about this, and I was thinking of an example, and I was saying, so one of the things I find difficult is any kind of form of confrontation. And my friend helpfully pointed out, and she was like, Abhayanandi, most people don't like confrontation. So it's kind of nice to know I'm not alone in that. But so a while ago, I was trying to think of a recent example, but I couldn't think of anything all that recent, which is good. So life's generally good in my world, which is nice. But there was some time ago at work where I was having a difficulty. I don't know how many of you have done Life with Full Attention, but in Life with Full Attention, we talk about completing your cycle. And there's something about somebody who doesn't complete their cycle, or something about finishing off somebody else's cycle, which is really irritating. And if you haven't come across this term before, it can be a bit like if you live in a shared house and you do the cooking. So somebody cooks before you, they use the pots, they have their meal, and they leave the pots unwashed, so that when you come to cook your meal, you have to wash their pots. That's what we mean by when you finish a cycle, you cook the meal, you wash the pots, your meal, or however you do it, but you finish off before you move on. So the thing that was going on for me was there was this continual thing this person was doing, and I was having to finish her cycles, and I was getting more and more irritated by it. So it can be difficult to actually speak to somebody about it. So that can feel unpleasant because difficult things are unpleasant. But actually it is a skillful action because it opens up communication. And then once the communication's opened up, you can decide where to go with it. Whereas before you open up that communication, all that happens is you have this sort of growing sense of resentment. Or at least that's what goes on for me. And I'm pretty sure that is what goes on. So you can't always rely on that it feeling good. Although, having said that, actually opening up communication, although the initial action can feel difficult, that does feel good, even if it doesn't always have the result that you want. So in this particular instance, it's not like the person magically stopped doing that irritating thing. I mean, they did for a while, but then they went back to it. But it did open up the communication. So then it was easier to get into dialogue around it. So ultimately it did feel good. And then conversely as well, that unskillful behaviour can sometimes feel good. Like that first, when somebody does something and it's really annoying, actually that first point of telling somebody else about it can actually feel quite pleasant. There can be something a bit like, I don't know, scratching an itch, a bit satisfying about going, and it's not that that's necessarily, even that isn't per se unskillful, but when it goes on, it can tip into unskillful. And usually you'll know, and it does have, even though that initial feeling can be quite pleasant, it does have a yuck, slightly sullied feeling afterwards. So on in some ways you can tell if an action is skillful or unskillful, but maybe you have to dig a bit deeper to find the sort of feeling tone to it. Yeah. Yes, I was thinking in some ways, so those examples are they're quite straightforward. Another aspect of positive emotion is to look for our motivations, for the reasons we're acting. So it's good to understand why we're doing things. And quite often our motives for doing things are going to be a bit mixed. So an example of a mixed emotion might be, I live in a shared house, there's some washing hanging up on the line and it's raining. So I bring the washing in, and partly I do it, just as a straightforwardly generous act, but maybe I also do it because I want your approval, like I want you to like me. So that's an example of a mixed emotion. And in a way, that doesn't really matter so much. It doesn't matter so much if our motivations are mixed, but it's good to be aware that our motivations are mixed. So we need to be aware of our motivations. It doesn't matter if they're mixed, as long as we do act on positive motivations. And another factor, so that's sort of an element of cultivating positive emotion. And then another factor in positive emotion is being aware that the attention that we bring to bear on the world affects it. It affects us and it affects the world. So an example of this would be, actually Maitreyabandhu uses a really good example in the book, but I won't use that one because hopefully you're all reading the book. So after this week you can read about his example. But the one that I was thinking of is a story that our teacher Sangharakshita tells of, he was in Kalimpong for a number of years, and Kalimpong is a Himalayan border town, and it's quite a forested, or at least at that time, I don't know if it still is, but it was quite a forested area. And he recalls going for a walk with this friend of his and pointing to this tree and saying what a beautiful tree this tree was. And his friend agreed with him and said, yes, it was indeed a beautiful tree, and there was enough firewood in that tree to last the whole winter. And the point that he was trying to make with this story was that we can view the world in a purely utilitarian way. And we can view the world in a way that places importance on beauty. And dependent on how we view the world, that'll have an effect on the world. So how this has probably had an effect on our world, because we don't know what effect our actions will have in the future. But I was walking around the park this morning. Actually, I was going for a run around the park this morning. And I was reflecting on the fact that, well, how grateful I feel for the fact that we have this big, beautiful green park in quite a built-up area, and how easily we could not have that. And the reason that we have this, like actually London has lots of big, beautiful parks. And the reason we do is that at some point in the past, people placed a value on beauty, on green spaces. So it's important to realise how we view the world and know that the way we view it will affect it. It will change the world. And the way we view and act towards people will have an effect as well. And last week I mentioned seeing this film, 3 Billboards Outside Epping, Missouri. And there's a scene in the film where there's a policeman, and actually he's quite an unpleasant character in the film. But there's one section where he gets a letter from his superior. His superior writes him a letter, and it's an extremely moving part of the film. And in this letter, the guy's sergeant, or anyway, the head honcho, tells him that he can really understand why he acts the way he does, but he also sees the goodness in him. Like, he also acknowledges the good in this policeman. And by the end of the film, you can see how you get a sense that this letter, this being really seen, or his potential being really acknowledged, has had, it feels like it's changed the whole course of his life. And I think we don't know the effect we have on people, but certainly seeing the potential, the way we see people will affect them. I mean, maybe not as dramatically as it does in this film. Yeah, but nonetheless it will. So we need to be aware of the attention that we place on things has an effect on them. The thing we need to be careful of when we're placing this attention is not to fall into a, Maitreyabandhu calls it sort of do-gooding. So not doing things for the effect somehow. So it's realising that we have an effect, but we're wanting our motive to come from an integrated, positive place. So we're not doing things just for the effect. And a way that we can tell that we're acting from a genuine sense of positive emotion is, so positive emotions has these 3 general characteristics. So there's an emotional characteristic, there's an energetic feel to it, and there's a cognitive element to it. So the emotional element is, if we're in a positive state of mind, we generally feel more open, we're expansive, we're more aware of others, we're more generous, and we're not overly critical of other people. On the energetic front, we have more energy, we feel more alive, we're more physically vital, and we're less resistant to life's sort of duties and things we need to do in life. And I was thinking of the truth of this, actually. I have to fill out a tax return form every year. And if I'm in a positive state of mind, it's much easier to do it. If I'm kind of generally feeling low, it's very hard to make myself do something like that. I feel much more resistant to doing something like that. And then if we're in a positive state of mind, we also tend to, the cognitive element is we tend to be more clear-headed, we're more curious, and we're more creative in the way that we respond to a challenging situation. Actually, I was. I hope my friend won't mind me bringing this example, but it was just such a good example, actually, of positive emotion. It's partly so. I have a friend who's going through a very difficult time at the moment. So she's just going through a breakup, and there's quite a lot of sadness involved, and I wanted to use this as an example of positive emotion, because although she's experiencing a lot of sadness, she's still very appreciative of her surroundings. And the thing I'm particularly struck by is that she's being very creative in her response to how she's feeling. And yeah, I was thinking, so one of the things was just in her approach to the Maitreyabandhu, just really taking a much more active, responding to it in a much more active way. So because, well, it's a breakup of a relationship, she was talking about using the precepts and going through each of the precepts, and in particular the sort of precept around stillness, simplicity and contentment. And I was just thinking of what a good example this was of positive emotion, not necessarily being bright and cheerful. Actually, you can cultivate positive emotion even when you're going through a really difficult patch or a really difficult time in your life. Having said that, it doesn't exclude being bright and cheerful. And a really important element of positive emotion is a sense of humour, or like to keep our sense of humour. And I was thinking very much of all the people that I admire, the people that I think are further down the spiritual path than I am, tend to be, really. You can see it, actually. You can see the positivity in them. I was thinking, we all know the Dalai Lama, and all the pictures I've ever seen of him, he's kind of smiling or laughing. And I was thinking a bit closer to home. I don't know how many of you know Nyanavarcha, but if you've ever been in his presence for any length of time, he's got the most amazing laugh. And you'll definitely, if you haven't heard it, you will. Oh, except that he's going away for a while, so you might not hear it soon. But, Maitreyabandhu's got a fantastic sense of humour. I mean, that you'll definitely, if you haven't come into contact with that, you will by the end of this course. And, Subhadramati as well. She's very quick to laughter. So, anyway, I won't go through all the people I know. But, yeah, so definitely a sense of humour is an important aspect of the spiritual life. With just a caveat that it's not at somebody else's expense. Yeah. So I wanted to say a little bit more about Vedana. Prajnamanas touched on it in the first half. Because Vedana is, it's really important to know what our underlying Vedana is in order to cultivate more skillful, in order to make better choices, actually. And it was great in the first half when we were doing our group. Louise provided me with such a lovely example of why knowing what the underlying Vedana is. Well, I hope you don't mind me saying. Oh, good. Great. So in the checking in, Louise was saying how when she comes home from work, like she might actually want to sit in front of the TV with a box set and a half bottle of wine. But she knows that if she does that, so your initial, I guess when I was thinking of that, I was like, oh yeah, no, I really get that actually. My initial sense of doing that would be really nice. But actually at the end of that, you don't really feel that great. Whereas the idea of going out for a run in the rain is not so appealing. But you actually know that afterwards you'll feel better. So there's something about that paying attention to the underlying Vedana or something, that underlying pleasant, unpleasant feeling, can help us make better choices. And it's so that you have a pleasant feeling and you can just stay with that. You don't necessarily have to go grasping after more. So in a sense, like a glass of wine and maybe watching one episode, that can keep it in the realm of, oh well, that's pleasant. But the problem with it starts tipping into sort of unskillful or unpleasant when we want more of it. So, and I was thinking that the truth of it for me was, I noticed this really particularly with the Lada's chocolate brownies. Like I really, really like the first 2 bites of their chocolate brownies. If I have the whole of their chocolate brownie, I genuinely feel ill. It's like really, it is too much. So it's that knowing how to stay with just, if we're aware of if we stay on the level of sensation, then we have that gap when we know where to stop. And it's the same with unpleasant sensation. So if somebody shouts at me, my immediate response is just to get defensive. But if I can stay with that immediate response of unpleasant feeling, then I can just, I can sit with the unpleasant feeling, and then hopefully I can choose how to respond, even if the response is, I can't quite respond just now. It's a more skillful response than reacting. But we need to get into the habit of staying with that, or getting used to staying with that underlying just feeling tone, sensation. And Prajnamanas also mentioned the sort of more neutral tone, because that is going to be probably our predominant feeling, but that's also going to be the thing that sort of drives our habits, is that wanting, it can often be the thing that drives the sort of mindless activity, the kind of, I don't know, wasting away time on Facebook, or the things that we do, in a sort of mindless, habitual way. Often the thing that drives that is a kind of boredom. It's just not quite being able to stay with that nothingness type feeling. So we could just try and feel how it stays how it feels, stay with how it feels, to just be a bit bored. So now we get on to the section where we need to. So that's all about kind of what positive emotion is, but also we need to. It's something that we need to actively cultivate. Funnily enough, we don't need to cultivate negative emotions; they're just there. So apparently the reason for this is to do with survival. So if we felt threatened, it was much more important that we noticed negative things, because we were much more in danger of I suppose being killed or dying if we didn't pay attention to the negative emotions. So we've got thousands and thousands of years of cultivating, noticing negative emotions, but there's not much value in terms of survival in noticing positive emotions. But there's a lot of value in terms of personal happiness and well-being in noticing positive emotions. But we do need to make much more of an effort to cultivate them. So actually a lot of positive things can happen during the day, but we're very, very good at taking them for granted. So in this section, we're going to start actively trying to cultivate positive emotions. And the things we're going to start with are gratitude and generosity. So, yeah. What was I going to say about that? Yeah, gratitude. I was reading, I wish I could remember where it was actually, because I was thinking about tonight and I thought, oh, there's this really useful bit of information. But anyway, so I'm going to paraphrase it. But the bit I remember is right. So I think it's probably, I don't know if any of you have heard of Martin Seligman, but he does positive psychology. And one of the things he did was ask a group of people to keep a diary for 2 weeks. So he divided the group into 3 sections, and one group he asked to keep a diary on 5 things they felt grateful for every day. The other group he asked to keep a diary on sort of 5 events that they just noticed during the day. Could be good or bad, didn't matter. And the third group he asked if they could keep a note of things that could do with improving during the day. And I'm not sure how long they did. I seem to recall it was a kind of 2-week period. And in that 2-week period, everybody in the group that had kept the gratitude diary said that they felt significantly happier than any of the people in the other 2 groups. So something about actually noticing the things that we feel grateful for does make us feel happier. And so does being generous. I don't know if you've ever noticed this yourselves, but I know I was doing this ages ago, quite a long time ago. For some reason we were doing this thing I'm going to ask you to do, is do a generous act that you might not normally do. And the generous act, one of the generous acts that I chose one time was to set up a standing order for free Buddhist audio. And I did feel really, really happy. And I'm not quite sure why it works, but it's something, I don't know, it's as though this is the way we should be, and when we are like that, the universe responds, or we just feel better. So this week I'm going to, so the home practice for this week is going to be to keep cultivating integration. So far we've been doing lots of different things, so maybe just keep doing one thing to keep cultivating integration. So either keep doing the mindful walk, if that's been working for you. If the 3-minute breathing space has been working for you, keep doing that. Or if having a mindful meal has been working for you, keep doing that. But maybe just keep doing one thing from the integration stage. And then I'm going to ask you to do 2 things for cultivating positive emotion. So the first thing is to keep a gratitude diary and to write down 5 things that you feel grateful for every day. And also I'm going to ask you to maybe do one generous thing every day that you wouldn't normally do. So I'm sure you do generous things every day anyway. So choose one one thing extra that you wouldn't normally do to do every day. And then for those, I know I was hearing in our group quite a few people, it sounds like quite a few people already have a meditation practice. But if you don't already have a meditation practice, maybe this week you could start trying to establish a regular meditation practice. So it's just sitting for, a short period of time every day, and doing, sort of doing that, the 3-stage mindfulness practice that Maitreyabandhu's outlined in the book. You can just do that, maybe for 10 minutes. Really sit, notice your feeling, really pay attention to your body. Maybe do, sort of a body scan, moving from the top down to the bottom of your body. Notice your breath. Try to notice how you're feeling. Just spend about 10 minutes a day doing that. Yeah, and do read the book. Like there's so much more in the book than we can possibly say in the time we've got here. So really do try and make time to read the chapter in the book. So now I'm going to ask you to get together in pairs and just say a bit about, when you think you might, why don't you say which of the integration practices you're going to take on to do, and then when you might try and fit in the meditation practice. Okay, so we'll have about 5 minutes to do that.